Sigurd Magnusson, though, Wellington Region EV Working Group Convenor, is going to summarise the day for us. Thanks.
Sorry. All right. So if your heads are anything like mine, it's relatively full, so I'm not going to try and throw too much new content at you. But as you've all been listening, I've also been trying to quickly put together a slideshow, plagiarising a few facts and figures and trying to kind of bring this together. But one of the dominant themes has been the emotional side. So I have found a couple of YouTube download movie clip type tools and sort of put together a little montage. So hopefully this will work. So we heard from a few different places that transport accounts for 17% of our emissions. So I guess if we just ponder a little bit about, why are we doing this and just put that into context. So we've clearly got ready-to-go solutions in transport, less so with corks and cows, I guess. But it's interesting to see in our country versus others that, our electricity emissions are relatively small. We've still got improvements that we can make there. Now, it's been talked about, but I thought I would just kind of show a little bit of a graph in terms of the emissions profile. So if you look at the black line at the beginning, you'll see that our light fleet transport emissions have not quite, but just about doubled over the last 20-odd years, since 1990, when the UN climate change base years have really been discussed from. And Barry Barton talked about a sense of, well, look, we might only have a 1% change to emissions. I've just sort of said, look, it's about flat from where we are now with our 64,000 vehicles. But there's a couple of things to think about here. So that red line is what New Zealand signed up, the nationally determined target. I'm trying to remember exactly what the acronym is. But that's what New Zealand signed up to in Paris, that red line across our country, which is to say a little bit less than 1990 levels come 2020, better still in those future years. So transport in its sector has to do a big change for it to play its part in that, particularly if we think about the fact that other sectors don't have ready-to-go solutions, and so arguably we should and could go to zero. And we heard, for example, that 70% of buyers are only buying second-hand cars, so therefore it's going to take a while for that to come through. But we can be buoyed by a few things. So we heard, for example, that from Malcolm, that to a manufacturer in the morning, that it will become cheaper for electric vehicles to be created versus petrol. And I just took a couple of random marks there. So we're apparently already at the point where a luxury car is just about cheaper to be made electric. We're a couple of years away from that mid-market. And one of my first cars was a Lada, so I thought it was fair just to put that at the point where all vehicles become cheaper to produce electrically than in combustion. And we've had this big discussion about when buses and trucks and so forth are going to be ready, and presumably that's not too far off either. But just because the manufacturers can make it economically, that's not necessarily the only factor, right? So Chelsea was talking about the fact that there was a sense of déjà vu around this, and that really globally we are reliant on just 3 key policies globally. Which I'll just pause for a moment, just because I think they haven't really been discussed in great detail, but I'll just kind of highlight a few different pieces. So one which is CARB, which is California, plus a few other states. Now, one of the interesting things is that back in 2012, that sets out that from 2018, that a percentage of vehicles must be fully electric. So plug-in hybrids don't actually factor into that. Now, there are a few little caveats. Some of the larger automakers can sort of delay it and push it back a couple of years and do credits, but fundamentally, from that year, that is when a significant part of North America is going to require, and there are obviously financial penalties, as we've seen when VW got into trouble in terms of carbon CAFE later on. So that's really significant. Now, if you Google for CARB and look at all that, you'll see actually that pretty soon that gets up to 22% of sales must be pure electric. So that's really significant, and that's the sort of thing that you can see why Chelsea's comments around other organisations trying to push back against that. So then we've got CAFE, which is all about improving miles to gallon. From memory, I think it was something like about an improvement of about 20 miles a gallon over the next sort of decade or two.
54.5 by 2025.
Right, so it's a significant improvement. And so that's 2 out of the 3. And then within the Europe, we have, minus now, I guess, the UK, a regulatory standard. So that has to get down to 95 grams, at which point it's quite a struggle to get a vehicle to run that efficiently right now. So that doesn't mean that all vehicles will go electric, but as part of a fleet, a number of electric and plug-in vehicles will need to comprise, be a significant part of that for all of those member states to participate. So I thought I'd just kind of dwell on that, just so you can see what is, I guess, that driving force. And I guess just to point out that these are the sorts of things that are not found in New Zealand as well. So Chelsea over dinner last night mentioned this phrase about, you sell cars like ice cream, not spinach. So I've sort of talked about spinach so far, right? That's all the, why is it good for you, and it's all healthy and all the rest of it. So, but really, the ice cream is that it's delicious and it's fun and it's emotion and all the rest of it. So I'll move on to that. And we've talked a little bit about how do we get, one of the people down here talked about, well, how do we get people emotionally excited? So I just thought I'd show you a clip of what New Zealanders have been doing. So this is late last year in Christchurch, and there were all sorts of different activities that were going on. So that's a fully electric motorbike. This is getting the next generation involved. They've built those electric vehicles. That toured Australia. Joseph's somewhere in the room actually. So look at that emotion. Come on. There. So how often do you get to ride in Ruapuna in an electric vehicle, huh? And of course there was a point where we just showed that the electric vehicles were just completely thrashing $900,000 petrol vehicles. I think that car's going backwards, isn't it? That's not my Lada. Right, so I think you get the picture, right? So this is stuff that was happening, and I think, if we see more and more of this type of stuff, that's how we're going to get people enthusiastic. So coming back to a little bit about what we've been hearing today, we heard that there are big changes, right? So one of the ones that really struck me was the fact that just such a significant percentage of our imports to the country is transport and fuel related, and at that point, I'm not at that point yet, but at some point I'll finish paying off my mortgage, and presumably I'll do something with that extra money. And so I wonder whether this is a little bit like paying off our mortgage for the country. We also heard about things like vehicle to the grid, and what happens when we can get when we can get solar down. It's halving every 13 months supposedly. We can store that energy, it can go into a car, we can play it back, and we can kind of go car to car. In other words, it's gone from the battery and it's cooking our meals in terms of the electricity there. We also talked a lot about ride sharing and the service base, the Uber models and what have you, and how that could be a solution to Auckland's motorways and what have you. Something that didn't come up, I was a little bit surprised, were things like TY and to a degree Huntly. So I kind of liken TY in some ways potentially to being, I guess, the soy latte of the aluminium world. It's one of the cleanest ways that the world is currently making aluminium. It's coupled with a hydroelectric dam rather than in China where it's typically coal. And so if that were to be shut down, then actually aluminium in general has suddenly got a little bit dirtier. And we're needing things like aluminium for aluminium and Teslas and all the rest of it. Or we could shut it down and that would power about every single electric vehicle. So we've got some interesting kind of things here that could come up. So we've got a little bit of homework, right? So we need firstly to look at coverage, and we've got some great people like Philip and Steve down here looking at phone boxes and fast chargers and what have you. But we also have to recognise that if we just chuck them all in and then let them just sit there for 2 years, then we'll end up like some of the places we have heard about today, where the reliability and the interoperability becomes a real hassle, and that starts to slow down that next wave of growth. So that's something that we really need to think about. And the other thing is, we need to be buying an EV whenever it possibly can work. And Malcolm gave me a challenge. He thought, well, look, we've heard about this bulk buy. And we know that we can reserve a Tesla Model 3 and put down $1,000 and what have you. But if we were to do a sort of almost a Kickstarter type thing, would that work where people could put down a deposit and it would show a level of demand, and then a manufacturer could say, well, actually, sure, look, I'll bring in 100 or 200 or 500 or 1,000 of those vehicle types. So it's a thought that Malcolm, chucked into the mix, and perhaps that's something that would, I guess, not just aggregate that demand, but make it a bit easier for different government agencies or the vehicle importers to not have to have a conversation of all 4 million of us, but to have a sort of intermediary like this. So if we did all of that and we got on with electric vehicles in New Zealand, well, perhaps we would start to see sorts of things that are already happening in other parts of the world. So Sigurd mentioned some stuff around diesel. So here's a photo of Paris, and one of the interesting things is that Paris is one of about 200 cities in Europe that already have low or no emission zones. So there's a red section there, and you cannot take particular types of diesel or petrol vehicles into that zone during weekdays. And there is a website where you can find out if you can take your vehicle into particular European cities. And what's happening over the years that go by is, whereas it started with, say, 20-year-old diesel vehicles, it's closing in on all fuel vehicles. So for example, in London there's a £11 fee to bring your car into London, but it's zero if it's an EV. Norway, for example, Oslo is similarly going to put about I think a $4 or $5 fee if you bring a fuel vehicle into their city. Barry Barton mentioned a little bit about policies and incentives, and I thought I'd just throw up a graph just so you could visualize what those actually look like. So this is what a bonus-malus system looks like. So the thing is to look on the left-hand axis. So basically, if you purchase a vehicle that has a high emissions, you have to pay an extra about €8,000. And if you get an EV or an efficient vehicle, well, then you're down on the other side. So I just chucked on some typical vehicle types there. So if you get your Toyota Hilux, you're looking at €8,000, which is quite a significant price signal, I guess you could say. Your typical middle row sort of Corolla is somewhere in the middle. And then, of course, your Priuses and your plug-in hybrids and your Nissan Leafs and all the full electrics are way down the other end. And so if you look at that spectrum, you're getting well over a €10,000 difference from one end of the market to the other. But the interesting thing here, which Barry has very eloquently put in his papers, is that the top right-hand side is funding the bottom left-hand side, and so therefore it's financially neutral because they have to recalibrate that mark periodically. So that's France, and then our dear friends in Norway basically have done the same thing. Now, they're a bit more complicated, there's more lines, but really I just say look at the left-hand axis. There's pretty well just another zero on it. That Toyota Hilux is up near the €40,000 mark. That's pretty impressive. So when Christina Buert at the start of the day was saying they're looking to end fuel vehicle sales come 2025, it's really about probably making that curve steeper, right? And I would almost say, look, in a New Zealand framework, that would probably already be cost prohibitive, but not for the Norwegians, it seems. And so with all of those sorts of policies in place, we would end up here. And so this is something that Dave Carley mentioned, the ZEV Alliance. There's a number of I guess, national and subnational governments that have signed up to this commitment to have a fully zero-emission sales future. And, I still see a little bit of room between Vermont and the bottom there. I'm sure Wellington or New Zealand probably could fit on there, there seems to be room. So I think, there's interesting points around this too. But it's not all about hatchbacks, and other types of hatchbacks, is it? So today we've been talking about different vehicle types. We've heard, we know about the right speed. There's quite interesting video footage of that zooming around on a desert. Robert Llewellyn has given us interesting talk about these gas turbine trucks in the States as well. And, hopefully, we've heard about BYD, but hopefully we won't just see all of these thousands of fully electric buses coming out of factories, but also coming down Lambton Quay. Perhaps we're not quite so congested, but... And sorry for the tragic music. So this is obviously just one manufacturer. I'm not really sort of trying to highlight one over another, but just to show that this is quite a significant rollout. There we go, that's enough of that. But it's also not just on land. So Norwegians, there they go again, they're already doing electric boats. This is a ferry, it can hold over 100 cars, it just plugs in at each end, and they're now putting in electric boat chargers into all of their ports as part of their wider transport strategy. So they're probably with their boats where we are with our cars, to be quite honest. So you can Google about that. It's made by Siemens if you want to Google it. And look, I guess I'll finish off with the last bastion. Now, has anyone heard about the solar impulse? So I think this is just utterly fantastic. Over the last couple of days, they've just flown this. They left New York, they did the Atlantic, which is a really iconic stretch of the globe, and landed in Europe in Seville. And so for those who don't know, this is a fully electric plane. It's currently in the process of going around the entire planet. And look, this has got a few steps more to go to be commercialized, but it's just so amazing that this sort of work being supported by Google and all sorts of other organizations is happening. So here it is taking off in New York. Now, its wings are covered in solar panels, so it's got an additional challenge. They thought a battery plane was not hard enough. They thought they'd also line it with solar panels and never plug in. So all of the electricity is from the sun. They've never plugged it in, and they've got enough solar panels that it can fly during the day, propel itself, and store enough electricity to continue flying right through the night. So really the only limiting factor is that the poor old pilot has to pee occasionally. So I think, yeah, this is great. And actually, no, I lied. This isn't quite the last thing. So this is a street in Norway, right? I can see a couple of electric cars, a couple of places where you can plug in, just more and more. And, so look, if we all work together over the next year and the years ahead, the streets of Wellington and the country will look just like this. Because, where's Richie? You need to do a drum roll as an ex-drummer. Right? Because the future is electric. There we go.